Creepy Battenberg.
Tonight, we return to the small Northumbrian town of Bedlington. A few weeks ago, I was contacted by a man who used to work in a supermarket in Bedlington many years ago. When we got talking, it reminded me of something that I saw as a child, and I will be sure to share that with you at the end of the show. It's time to get comfortable, turn down the lights, and enjoy two different stories from two different parts of the world. In the late 70s and the early 80s, I worked in a supermarket in Bedlington. I would often have to go down into the warehouse to collect items to restock the shelves. Now, before I go any further, I want to say that there was only one way in and one way out of that warehouse, and it was through double doors that opened inwardly to the warehouse. They were very heavy doors with brushes on the bottom, so bear this in mind as well. One day, I was in the warehouse picking up goods from the rows of stock we had on the floor. I looked up to see a black Labrador walking through the warehouse, and straight away I felt that there was something wrong about this. "That's not really there. That's not really there," said a voice in my head. It sounds so laughable to be scared by a Labrador, but I ran out of the warehouse and got some of my workmates to return with me, as I wasn't going back in alone. We all searched the warehouse, but the Labrador was nowhere to be found. I had heard rumours of strange things happening, but I never believed it until then. My friend Lisa, who worked there, went down to collect some fruit from the chiller one day. She got a crate of bananas out and placed them on a trolley. She went back to the chiller to get some oranges, and came back to find the bananas were gone. After a few moments, she decided that she must have forgotten to put the bananas on the trolley, so she went back for more. As she was about to put the latest crate on the trolley, she found that the other bananas had since returned. She left the fruit and ran out of the warehouse, refusing to go back alone. Our manager arranged to have a chicken wire cage put around the chocolate and sweet stock. There was a good reason for this. If any of us were feeling hungry, we would sometimes eat something from there. So one day, there was the 5 of us in the warehouse, and we were all having a break, when we saw the cage rattling as if it was being thumped by an invisible force. We all exchanged looks of disbelief as the thumping echoed across the warehouse. One evening, we had to pull a door handle out of the wall after it was seen violently swinging open. I had worked there long enough to become a key holder for the warehouse, and I had the key in my pocket one Sunday afternoon. I was spending time with a girl on a park bench around 100 yards from the store. Now, this was back in the days when supermarkets didn't open on a Sunday. The girl I was with suddenly pointed and said, "What the hell is that?" We saw a glowing ball at the window, around about the size of a beach ball, bouncing up and down in a very controlled manner. We watched, totally mystified. It moved to the right, and did the same before moving to the left. It again moved right, bouncing all the time before disappearing. What was happening also almost cost me my job. Like I said, I was a key holder to the warehouse. I did a stock check one night whilst I was there alone, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I locked the double doors and left for home. The next morning, when I went to work, the manager grabbed me by the neck and pushed me up against the wall. He asked me what the hell I had been playing at last night. I said that I had no idea what he was on about. He grabbed me and marched me downstairs to the warehouse and pointed through the small windows on the double doors. There was sugar spread all over the floor from one end of the warehouse all the way to the doors. I stared in disbelief as he was ranting about what I was supposed to have done. Without knowing how, I told him I could prove to him that it wasn't me that did it. Then it came to me. I remembered the doors only opened one way, so if I had spread the sugar, I would have to have pulled the doors open, which would have left a semicircle in the sugar going to the brushes on the bottom of the doors. I watched as the realisation dawned on his face. He apologised, and thankfully I got to keep my job. I would love to go back one day to investigate the place, but I certainly would never do it alone. Hello guys, it's Creepy here. I'm currently looking into gaining access to the building featured in this first story, but I'm having a little bit of trouble with this at the moment. I'm also trying to contact a friend of the man in the story, as apparently he had a lot of experiences working there himself, and I will update you on further developments as and when they happen. Now, I don't usually stop in the middle of the stories and scary true tales, but I really wanted to tonight. In our second story, the person who submitted has requested that I don't change his name or keep him anonymous. He is a man called Billy. He's a Native American and his story is really quite remarkable, and I think this is very brave of him, and I'm looking forward to sharing his story with you, so really get strapped in for this one because it's something else. The first time I encountered my demon, I was just 4 years old. I remember it perfectly. I used to sleep with an Aristocats poster as a blanket because my family was really poor. I woke up to a shadow standing in my room in front of my window. You could see the eyes, but nothing else on the figure. Its eyes burned into the back of my mind. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It moved into the darkness, then moved back where I could see it before disappearing. A few moments later I saw a massive hand reach from under my bed and grab my leg, then pull really hard. I got loose and curled up in the corner of my bed against where each wall met, and I screamed. Finally, my mother ran in, turned the light on, and couldn't explain what happened. She said not to worry and go back to sleep. The second time I encountered this entity was when I was still a boy. My mum always told me this story about a demon they called the Red Killer. She would always point to an old abandoned house out in the woods a little way down the driveway of our reservation. I was told to never go down that driveway and to absolutely never go to the abandoned house in the woods. All my cousins knew the story pretty well too. And the story was that if you walk along the drive towards the road at dusk or night, the Red Killer would try and get you. He wouldn't go past the tree line, but he would reach out and claw you or try to grab you. Well, one day, I decided that I'm going to venture down the driveway at dusk, and I made it halfway down and heard something beside me. I looked to see what it was, and I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me from inside the wood line. It had a mouthful of monstrous-looking teeth, and I heard it chuckling at me. All of a sudden it reached out at me with a clawed arm in incredible speed. It cut my left arm open before I pulled it back again. It reached back with its right arm and its claws ripped my arm open. I screamed for help, trying to get away from its grip. I somehow managed to get away and I ran as fast as I could up the driveway. I made it back into the house, blood dripping from my arm as I ran to my mum. I tried to tell her what had happened, but she insisted that it must have been a raccoon and I was being crazy. I got in serious trouble for that and was grounded. My parents kept an extra eye on me for the next month until we moved house. They never let me outside again when the sun reached the horizon. By the way, I still have the scars to this day. I was to have a third encounter when I was only 11 years old. I woke up to find my mother being pinned by her shoulders to the floor by a shadow figure. I cried out to God to help me, and as soon as I had, it disappeared into thin air. I ran to my mother to embrace her, but she told me I was just having a night terror and that it was all in my imagination, and she made me go back to bed. Looking back, my mother was very dismissive on my part. I'm sure she was trying to protect me from what was really happening. She had suffered and seen the same things that I did, but she didn't want me to give in and grow up being afraid like she was. Not long after the third encounter, I was taken away from my mum and moved in with my grandmother. That's when things took a turn for the worse. I started to have monstrous dreams, and I can remember every conversation I had with each demon in my dream. Some would not show themselves, but you knew they were there. Some would take the form of angels, but I knew they were no angels. Some would just pop up randomly through other dreams, and some would show up in my waking hours, like whilst I was at school. But the physical manifestations were always the worst. When I was 14, I had a friend called Austin, and we used to take walks down this road called the Private Drive. Some of the kids in that neighbourhood would play with Ouija boards. One night, me and Austin joined them. Things went fine for a while. We made contact with a guy named Doug, who died during World War II in 1945, and a lady who said she had died from AIDS. We talked to some of the other guy's family members who had passed away, and then it happened. The planchette rotated at me by itself before spelling out D-E-M-O-G-A. Demoga. We asked it what it wanted, and it spelt my name, followed by the words, "Your body, so I can live." Everyone freaked out, so we stopped the session, and all the other kids avoided me after that. But that wasn't the end of it. A few weeks later, me and Austin were taking a walk down the Private Drive when we heard a sound like light rain. There were no clouds in the sky, so it obviously wasn't that. You could hear it in the trees beside us. It got louder and louder to the point where it sounded like the sky was falling on us, but it was still completely dry. Then I heard the noise next to me and looked to my right. There it was, standing beside the trees. It must have been almost 10 feet, and its skin was both black and white. It looked right into my eyes and had a grin that no one in this world has ever seen. I didn't panic. I just said, "Austin, come here, get over here." And when he caught up to me and looked, he bolted so quick I didn't have time to realise he had gone. I did the only reasonable thing I could and asked it its name. "You know my name," it said. I backed away and I started to run. I didn't stop running until I got home, and I didn't hear from Austin in a few weeks after that. But when he did come around, he finally believed me about the things I could see and all the things I told him that had happened to me. Unfortunately, it was only 1 week after that Austin came around that I was sent to foster care. I remember the date. It was December the 19th, 2007. Whilst I was in foster care, I stayed down in Bibb County in a group home called The Fortress. Nothing ever physically manifested, only nightmares to the point of suffering from insomnia. I was there till the 19th of December 2008, exactly 1 year when I was fostered out to a friend I went to school with's parents. Now I really don't know what happened a week after I got fostered, but I remember I had been drinking beer. I was only 15 at the time. I blacked out, and my new foster parent said I was sitting on the front porch when she came out to talk to me. That's when she realised I was levitating about 3 inches off the ground, and she said I slowly turned my head and looked at her with a dead glare. My eyes were solid black, and she said my chest had arched out, and I started yelling in some weird language she'd never heard. Then I dropped back down into the chair I was sitting in. I came to, and I remember the look she gave me was beyond worried. It was perfectly normal when the ambulance got there, and they blamed it on some medication I was on mixed with insomnia, but I knew that wasn't possible. I didn't have an incident for many years after that. I now believe that whatever it is has been in my family for generations, and it moves down the bloodline. I remember this next bit like it was yesterday. My daughter was only 1.5 years. She started freaking out this night really badly and said, "Scary, scary, dark, dark," before pointing to a corner in her room. She zoned out for 5 minutes without making a sound or a move, and then I asked her, "Is there someone else in the room, sweetheart?" She looked at me and shook her head before falling asleep. The next day she looked at my wife and said, "I don't want you to die, Mummy." A few months later, after putting my daughter to bed and getting up to go to bed myself, my daughter shoots up and says, "Don't get in your truck, don't get in your truck, Daddy." She then fell asleep straight away. The next day, I totaled my truck. Things went smoothly after that, but my daughter is terrified of the dark and hates being on her own. I don't know why, but I was always the same way as a child. It was then when it all started happening again. The nightmares first. Then they started manifesting almost every day around me. The only way I could deal with it was doing things like drinking and smoking and lying, hurting people around me emotionally. But it all stopped when I prayed to God, but not before I almost lost my wife. I got close to God and started praying and protecting my house. This year, I haven't had anything happen to me. I haven't seen or heard anything or had a nightmare since I gave my life to God to protect me. It's something that seems unreal to believe in, but trust me, there is a God, and without him I'm very, very vulnerable to what's after my family. Hello everyone, it's Creepy here again, and I'm sure that you really enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Now please take a look at this photograph. This is the scars on Billy's left arm after his attack by the entity when he was a small child. I find it hard to believe that such scars were caused by a raccoon. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Now think back to the start of the show when I said I wanted to share an experience of mine when I was only 6 or 7 years old. I was reminded of this when the gentleman in the first story told me about seeing the Labrador in the warehouse. Now, I had been at my friend's birthday party only a few doors along from my own house. And when I was young, I had a problem with using other people's toilets and I had to go home to use mine. Weird, I know. But when I went back to his, I looked through the window to see a beautiful black Labrador, my favourite kind of dog. And my friend's mum answered the door and I asked whose the dog was. She looked at me totally bemused and she said that no one had a dog there, and sure enough, there was no dog. There you go, your Uncle Creepy had weird stuff happen too. Before I go, I have a few things to say. First up is, look out for 3 standalone stories in the Uncle Creepy Tells Your Tales series this week, and I have also been asked to do some collaboration with another YouTuber, but I'm not going to say too much right now because I don't want to spoil it. And last of all, before I go, I want to say a huge thank you to Megan Creech. Megan has single-handedly designed a website for Creepy Battenberg, and there are no words really that I can use to thank her enough. I'm also going to be doing a lot of work with Megan in the coming weeks and months, which is exciting. This is Creepy Battenberg saying good night and take care.